Today, we will look at the contents of the hot off the presses new system of government created by the U.S. Constitution, as well as the fight to ratify or formally approve of its use. Understand that writing the U.S. Constitution was only the first step. The struggles now shifted to convincing enough of the 13 original states to agree to use it. While 56 delegates attended the Constitutional Convention, not all 56 saw the process all the way through to the end. 25% or 14 of those delegates will bail before the process concludes in September of 1787. Remember, the meeting began 4 months earlier in May of 1787. Some got tired of the hot air-conditionless months spent debating topics we've already mostly described. Clearly, these people did not have faith that they'd be able to complete the task of creating an entirely new government. But fortunately for us, those that remained solved the points of contention, persevered, and the result was the U.S. Constitution. Now, of the 42 that remain, only 39 will sign the Constitution. The 3 that don't sign refuse for a very specific reason. See, the original Constitution contained no protections regarding the individual rights of U.S. citizens. All those little things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to an attorney if accused of a crime, protection from cruel and unusual punishment. None of those rights that most Americans view as essential to what it means to be an American, none of those rights appear in the original version of the Constitution. They will come a few years later in the form of changes or amendments to the Constitution. Well, for these 3 delegates who chose not to sign, they did not sign because of the absence of these protections, the rights of the individual citizens. They argued to include some of those previously discussed protections like freedom of speech, etc., before releasing the Constitution. But the majority of delegates felt that they first needed to get what had been put down on paper ratified or formally approved before attempting to tackle another issue like individual freedoms that could be another opportunity for the convention to derail itself. Promise as they did to come back and address the issue of individual rights later, the 3 who wouldn't sign refused to sign without inclusion of those rights, so there were only 39 signees of the Constitution. So, with names affixed, they begin the process of rolling out this new plan for government and attempting to convince enough people to vote yes on ratification before the Constitution can become the law of the land. Let's take a moment and look at how the Constitution is set up. Understand that the United States Constitution is an instruction manual for government, and as an instruction manual, it is written as such. So there isn't an attempt to use colorful, inspirational language in describing the rules or structure of government. Instead, it is written like any other instruction manual. It is dry and straightforward. Insert tab A into slot B, type text. Like any instruction manual, the Founding Fathers attempted to organize this set of instructions in the most logical fashion possible to make it easy to find what you were looking for. So the main body of the Constitution is broken up into 7 chapters. However, they use the word articles, and each article or chapter has a particular theme or subject matter. Now, before diving into those 7 articles, the Constitution begins with an introduction, which exists to explain the goals of the Constitution. You remember this as the "We the People" song, but it is more than a song. The preamble lists the goals the Founding Fathers hoped to accomplish in writing a new plan for government to replace the Articles of Confederation. Goals like establishing a more perfect union, more perfect than under the Articles of Confederation, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, etc. After singing, or rather listing these goals, they then get down to the nuts and bolts of describing the new government. Chapter 1, or Article 1, explains everything you would need to know about the legislative branch, or, as they're also known, the U.S. Congress. This, for those who don't know, is the branch of government that includes our U.S. House of Representatives and our U.S. Senate. Collectively, the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate are known as the U.S. Congress. Not only was this branch of the federal government written about first, but this article is also the longest. It has the most written about it. Usually, people are able to infer that the Founding Fathers' viewpoint on Congress, based on them being written about first as well as being written about most people understand that Congress was the original focal point of government. But over the years, a different branch, the executive branch, of which the president is the focal figure, has clawed itself into the driver's seat of our federal government. So probably not the intention of the Founding Fathers, but nonetheless the reality in which we find ourselves. And this is something that happened years ago when powerful personalities like Andrew Jackson and others were elected to this most powerful position in government. The second article lays out everything you need to know about the president and the executive branch, while the third article, which is the shortest, explains our federal court system, of which the United States Supreme Court is the most prominent piece. Oddly enough, there is not a whole lot written in this article. It basically states that the Founding Fathers' intention was to have a national court system, but furthermore, it states that Congress, once elected, should set it up as best they see fit. The fourth article discusses the relationship of the states to one another. It essentially instructs the states to play nice with each other and respect each other's laws. This is why your driver's license, for example, grants you driving privileges in all states, or that once you're married in one state, you're legally married in all 50 states. Article 4 lays down this expectation for the states. Article 5 may just be the most ingenious part of the U.S. Constitution, as it explains a procedure for updating or amending the Constitution. This is in large part the reason the U.S. Constitution has lasted for as long as it has, because it can be amended or changed. We've, as a nation, been able to update the Constitution to meet the needs of the time period. This amendment process has created a flexible living document that once again, because of its adaptability, has stood the test of time. The Founding Fathers knew that they could not possibly imagine the challenges of the future nation, so they put in place a procedure for updating or amending the Constitution should such circumstances present themselves. Know that it's not easy to change the Constitution. However, it is possible. And in the 230 plus years we've used the Constitution, we've added 27 amendments or updated the Constitution 27 times. Article 6 contains some simple provisions like a promise to pay our national debt, which 230 years later, we are still working on, so just relax. Additionally, you can find some different oaths to be taken before taking office. Then Article 7 explained the process by which the new government under the U.S. Constitution could be ratified or formally approved. Essentially, it stated that when 9 of the 13 states agreed to use the Constitution, then they would begin the process of electing the first Congress and the first president. Remember, that in this original form, the U.S. Constitution made no mention of individual rights guaranteed to its citizens. So, under the Constitution, they were now proposing a three-branch federal government. Here you can see that those three branches were the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. This was done to ensure separation of powers, which is one of the many safeguards the Founding Fathers wove into this new plan for government to protect against a government that one day might become abusive of its powers. One way to empower the new national government, but also guarantee it won't run amok with those powers, is to take the powers and divide them among different groups within government. Here, a Congress, a president, and a Supreme Court.
And now, another fact of Congress. Like a tree, our national government has three branches. First, there is the President of the United States, called the Executive Branch. The President is like your school principal. He makes important policy decisions on things like the environment and health care. He's also the commander-in-chief of the military. A second branch is Congress, called the Legislative Branch. The main job of the legislative branch is to debate and pass laws. They also oversee the activities of the president. Finally, there is the court system, or the judicial branch. Sometimes people disagree about what laws mean, so we ask judges to help us decide. The Supreme Court is the ultimate judge of the land. These three branches of government work together to form a complete system. And that's another fact of Congress.
The first of the three branches that we want to investigate is the legislative branch, which is also known as Congress. Remember from our discussion of the Constitutional Convention that our legislative branch, like England's, was structured to be bicameral or consist of two houses. Those two houses, as we previously discussed, are known as the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. Here you can see a visual representation of that. Know that their primary job is to make the laws of this nation. Additionally, it is important to note that they also control all the money collected and spent by our federal government. So when we look at issues like federal budget deficits and national debt, the common response is to blame the president because it's easier to point the finger at one person. But a more educated and informed individual would know that not a single dollar is spent by Uncle Sam without Congress first giving the go-ahead. Remember, money is power, and Congress, not the president, controls our nation's money. Article 2 is the executive branch, which consists most visibly of the President of the United States. But there are also others. There is also a vice president, of which most people are familiar. There is also a group of people chosen by the president as advisors, who are collectively known as the cabinet, and they oversee millions of people who work in various executive departments, such as the Department of Defense or the Department of Treasury. There are 15 of these departments. Collectively, they are charged with the responsibility of enforcing the laws. The President of the United States and the executive branch swing the big stick if you are not following the laws passed by Congress. At this point in the discussion, I always make the analogy that Congress is the barking dog. And the only reason you fear the barking dog is the teeth inside the mouth of the barking dog. The executive branch is the teeth in the mouth of the dog. You don't adhere to the barks, then the chief executive will sink its teeth into your meaty rear end. The last of the three branches, and covered in Article 3, is the judicial branch, which consists of a three-level national court system. On top of the national court system is the Supreme Court, whose acronym is SCOTUS, which sounds like a horrible skin condition. Can you help me out, Doc? I keep scratching myself. Something funny. I think I've got a case of the SCOTUS. But it's actually the correct acronym for Supreme Court of the United States. Below the U.S. Supreme Court, there is the U.S. Court of Appeals. And then the lowest level of courts in the federal court system, we have the district courts. And here is where you see trials, most like the ones you've seen on TV in the movies, where you have a defendant and a defense attorney squared off against a prosecuting attorney who's attempting to prove to a jury that the defendant committed a crime and should be punished. All this while a judge referees the whole proceedings. When we describe the role of the federal courts, we usually describe them as having the primary job of interpreting laws. Another safeguard woven into the framework of the Constitution is represented by this image, and we've also previously spoken of this concept. This picture represents federalism. This is the concept that to make the Constitution work, powers were divided between the federal government and the state governments, with the federal government firmly planted in the driver's seat. This division of powers was again no accident and was done to guard against giving too much power to any one group or any part of the government. By dividing powers between the federal government and the states, you reduce the risk of that power being abused.
And now another fact of Congress. Our government is like a big three-layer cake. We have local government, state government, and national government, often called federal government. But your local government doesn't handle foreign affairs, and your federal government doesn't handle trash pickup. Local government handles local issues like police, water, and building permits. State government handles issues about your state, such as education, healthcare, and recreation. Federal government handles national issues such as national parks, the military, and space exploration. The U.S. Congress is a part of our federal government. This system of dividing responsibilities among governments is called federalism. And that's another fact of Congress.
A third safeguard put into the fabric of the Constitution is the idea of checks and balances. And checks and balances is the idea that each branch has the power to restrain the powers of the other branches.
Our country was founded on the principle of balance, that no branch of government could dominate another. For example, Congress is responsible for passing laws, but it's up to the president to okay them. The president nominates judges, but Congress must approve them. Judges can declare laws unconstitutional, but Congress can remove judges from the bench. This system of power sharing is called checks and balances, but it doesn't stop there. We balance responsibilities between the federal government and the state governments. We balance influence between big states and little states. We balance rights between the needs of the individual and the needs of everyone. The resulting system might look like a complicated maze of boxes and arrows, but it's really quite simple. And that's another fact of Congress.
So, after the Constitution is revealed to the general public, remember, most Americans at the time had no idea that this was even being discussed. People began to take sides regarding adoption or ratification of the new government or opposing the Constitution. It wasn't rolled out to unanimous applause. Today, clearly we know it worked out, but 200 plus years ago, this was not a foregone conclusion. The first of two camps people found themselves in was referred to as the Federalists. These were supporters of the Constitution. Many of the leaders within this group had also attended the Constitutional Convention, and therefore should come as no surprise that they would advocate or support ratification and urge others to do likewise. And fittingly enough, those that opposed the Constitution and the system of federalism that it provided referred to themselves as anti-federalists. So anti-federalists opposed ratification in some states, key states at that time too. Anti-federalists outnumbered supporters of the Constitution. You have to understand that there was, somewhat as there remains today, a strong fear of big government, and anti-federalists saw the U.S. Constitution as another step closer to big government. In the era before Facebook, Twitter, social media, television, and radio, the best way to get your message out to a large number of people was the printed word or newspapers. So, Federalists began publishing anonymous articles known as the Federalist Papers to attempt to convince others that they too should support the Constitution. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 85 of these essays were written and published, and historians today, after analyzing the writing, believe the majority were written by three men, the three men you see before you: Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. But these articles were effective in reducing fears and mounting support for ratification of the Constitution in the numbers necessary for the states to put the Constitution into operation as the new plan for U.S. government. In December of 1787, a few short months after adjourning the convention and beginning the process of winning support, the first of the 13 states ratifies the Constitution. That state was Delaware, which is why on their state quarter it says, "the first state." One down and 8 to go to get to the magical number of 9, which is the number of states needed to put the new government into operation. Almost a year later, they get their number 9 when New Hampshire joins the other 8 states, bringing the total to 9, who had already chosen the U.S. Constitution as the best course for the new nation. It's been a while since we've looked at a political cartoon, but here is a challenging one from 1788. What key aspects from this cartoon do you notice? Students often point out the columns or the pillars, each with the name of one of the original 13 states on it. Students also point out that there are 8 standing pillars and 2 that are not yet upright. Students also mention the arches with stars that look to be joining the pillars or columns together. Students also notice the cloud from which a hand is protruding from it. What is often misinterpreted is the fact that the hand from the clouds is in the process of standing up these pillars to place them upright. So what do you think all this means? Generally, all of this is interpreted as some divine godlike hand reaching down from the heavens and uniting the 13 individual states into a more unified, stable, and strong structure. It's the 13 individual states transitioning to the unified United States. If you look at the order of the states, they are actually in the order in which they joined the new United States under the U.S. Constitution. The only error being that New Hampshire was the 9th state, not Virginia. However, due to the slow travel of news, given the way in which news slowly traveled during this time, this can be understood and forgiven. This one is a tough one to interpret, as it takes a little more knowledge of American history to grasp the full picture for one's self. Even after the 9th state, New Hampshire, ratifies, a problem, however, exists. As 4 states, some of them important states, have yet to accept the Constitution, making the union of 13 states uncertain at this point. Among those yet to ratify were New York and Virginia, who at the time were 2 of the more populated states. This is not good. You combine that with New York's burgeoning status as a financial hub of the United States, and this is doubly troublesome. As you know, eventually, New York and Virginia joined the team. And later in 1788, we begin the process of holding elections to fill the new positions created by the U.S. Constitution. In 1789, the new government, shaped by the U.S. Constitution, is open for business. And since that time, its use has never been interrupted or suspended. We've had numerous economic crises, a civil war, 2 world wars, and yet the U.S. Constitution has remained our system of government, making it the world's oldest active constitution for any nation on the planet. Later in 1789, North Carolina will ratify the U.S. Constitution, leaving 1 state out in the cold. Any guesses? It should be evident. It should come as no surprise that the last state to ratify the Constitution was Rhode Island. It should come as no surprise because remember, they didn't even attend the Constitutional Convention in the first place. So it should not be a surprise that they didn't immediately wrap their arms around a new plan for government that created a stronger central government, as this was something Rhode Island didn't initially support. Eventually, however, perhaps seeing the dangers of being left alone, Rhode Island ratifies the Constitution and joins the other original 13 states in creating a truly United States.